Erica, thank you so much. I'm Tom Hallock. I'm co-chair of Force Multiplier, and it's time for the Q&A. We're so grateful to have you here with us tonight. We're so grateful for the work that you've been doing and for sharing it so generously. You're really helping a lot of people understand a moment that's outside of our experience and figure out what our response can be. I wonder before we dive into the many questions that have arisen in chat, if you could just help locate us a little bit. Where are we now in this moment in the authoritarian project, and how is the resistance to Trump faring so far? What's your assessment?
Yeah. What's the score? My opinion on this is just informed, it's my opinion as a social scientist, and there's some controversy about this, so I'm not the last word on it. But where I think we are is that we have experienced what political scientists call an autocratic breakthrough. And right now, we're in a period of autocratic consolidation, is what it's called. And I say this on the basis of the branches of the national government that are now completely ineffective in constraining the executive, an executive who seems intent on breaking norms around restraint of himself in ways that are very hard to come back from. And also the federal structure, which has often provided an additional check on federal overreach, not functioning in the manner in which it might, in part because of consequential court decisions that have begun to chip away at their independence in very important ways. For example, the standoff that took place between Gavin Newsom and Trump over Trump's nationalization of the National Guard in California around the LA protests and then the deployment of Marines there. That was decided by a federal judge in Nevada, I think, that Trump actually did have a right to nationalize them because it was a rebellion. And it qualified as a rebellion. And the president, we couldn't, the country should not interrupt a president executing its constitutional duties to protect federal property and personnel in the context of a rebellion that could not be managed by local authorities. That is the way the court decided. This was a manufactured crisis, right, by the federal government. And in this case, the court could not find its way out of arguing that Trump had this authority. And that kind of thing is extremely consequential for how states act, right, toward the federal government from now on. So I think those types of things are concerning. And then this sort of civil society side, civil society is the beachhead for democracy defense, has been quite mixed. So it's mixed in the sense that the sort of key civic institutions have been on a very wide range, but not at all together, on how to respond to bullying and sidelining attempts by the administration. So there isn't the level of unanimity that existed even in early 2017 or something by major corporations and major civic institutions who just decided they were going to carry on. They're just going to carry on and do their thing. And if they couldn't even imagine Trump kind of coming after them in the manner in which he's coming after them now. And you still had a sort of center-right faction in the GOP in the House, right? And even they were doing things like not letting the ACA get gutted, They were responsive to people who called, who were like indivisible groups who were calling them and saying, I don't want this, I don't want this. And they're like, okay, we will not vote for it. That is different now, right? The GOP is completely acquiescent to whatever Trump is saying, and Congress is serving functionally as an implementation arm of the executive branch, right? So that's very different. And I would say, on the broader kind of grassroots side, I think is where we've seen the bright spots. People are doing protest in record numbers, and the sort of news that the resistance is dead or whatever was, shall we say, declared prematurely. My team at the Crowd Counting Consortium has documented by the end of May of 2025, so 5 months into the year, 3 times as many protests as has happened in 2025 as had happened in 2017. And 2017 was a historic year for protest in America, record-breaking numbers. 2025, 3 times as many just through May. That's before the No King's Day and all in Good Trouble and all of those subsequent protests. So we're talking about a huge number of people who are standing up. They're also doing so in very creative ways, different kinds of non-cooperation. The Tesla campaign was very interesting. Those are those direct material costs I was talking about, like shares plummeting, right? The value plummeting, like $100 billion disappearing, like huge amounts of money disappearing because people wouldn't buy Teslas anymore, or they're selling them back, or they're preventing other people from wanting to buy them. So that's significant because it's more than just protest. And then you have instances where people are doing things like mutual aid, rapid response, community teams that are responding to ICE abductions and things along those lines in ways that are honestly extremely courageous because of the high costs of the crimes that they are charged with for doing that. And we are seeing people being charged with extremely serious crimes just for standing by and asking questions when ICE agents are taking people. And so these have high costs and people are still doing it, right? So we're seeing an extremely mobilized grassroots right now. And I think what remains to see is how coherent and coalescent the different forces that are already on side to defend democracy might become in the coming months. Because the more that there can be alignment on strategy and coordination on strategy and communication and training and the information that people have access to, the more effective the response will be, especially as the situation becomes more acute.
Thank you. So lots of questions here, and on a lot of different subjects. Darren is asking, at what stage of a resistant movement does it become essential to engage in nonviolent disobedience, i.e. activity that disrupts the normal activities of everyday life, as opposed to mere marching and rallying? And maybe you could talk a little bit about what economic non-cooperation might look like beyond the Tesla takedowns and all that.
Yeah. So, civil disobedience is a particular category of nonviolent action where people basically break what they see as an unjust law using nonviolent, they do so nonviolently, but they're willing to be arrested and they're willing to pay the price personally for doing that. And so civil disobedience is like it's a particular tactic that is costly personally, with that by itself doesn't necessarily do much, but in the context of a broader campaign can be very meaningful, especially when done in mass. The sort of classic example of this is the Salt March in India, where Gandhi went and broke the law that said that Indians could not make their own salt and consume it because they were supposed to export it straight to the crown. That would be an example of civil disobedience where all they marched to the sea, made salt, were arrested for it. And that galvanized a huge movement. In that context, you can see the strategy of it, but just being willing to be arrested alone or something like that does not necessarily have immediate results. I think the there's sort of 3 categories of methods of nonviolent action that Gene Sharp articulated, and I think it can still be a quite useful way of thinking about it. You have the techniques of protest and persuasion. So that's things like street demonstrations, protests, rallies, flash mobs, things along those lines. Then there's non-cooperation, and that can be economic non-cooperation, boycotts, strikes, work stoppages, go slows. It can be political non-cooperation, which is things like sit-ins at a official's office or something like that. And then there's social non-cooperation, which is things like stigmatizing people or refusing them service and things like that. And then there's a third category called alternative institutions or nonviolent intervention. And that's where people are basically building what they need at a community level that the government is not providing because of neglect or animus. So that's mutual aid. That's like alternative economic cooperatives. It's building new conflict adjudication processes because you can't access fair treatment through the courts or arbitration or whatever. So, there's like a lot of different ideas out there. And I would just say that the way that I think about building a strategy that works is sort of building the strategy and then reverse engineering the tactics from there. So there's not one like formula for which ones to stack up or something like that. It's like, which pillars are you trying to get to defect, and then building tactically to that point, given a particular campaign or its target.
There's several questions here about kind of the relationship of media to protest movements and how that has changed with the rise of social media. Can you get the same kind of amplification? Mainstream media often seems to have an allergic reaction to really covering protests. What's the relationship there, and how can we best amplify the impact of the protest actions?
Yeah. I mean, some of it I think is actually doing the diligence around the media relationship. So, like finding the journalists that can come and cover it, and working with them to make sure they know about things in advance and they're there and they're like, and then that they might cover it uh, in a way that makes clear who did what to whom. I actually think one of the most damaging things about media coverage that social sciences sort of help to illuminate is that the vagueness is always going to work for the autocrat. So when I say vagueness, I mean something like a headline that says protesters and police clash on the bridge. Now, if you say protesters and police clash, that sounds like the protesters and police broke out in a bar fight. Let me tell you, having been to many of these things myself, and I'm sure people on this call have been to these before, that's not really how it goes down, almost ever. And so what is more useful is when they say police rush protesters on bridge, or something that is like, who did what to whom? Which is what, basic journalism is supposed to be about. And then some analysis and things, but like spell it out, like try to attribute some attribution to who did what. And that actually really helps, like, because the public has a set of heuristics that they use to shortcut, what they think happened there. And it can really damage the way that movements are framed and received by the public. So my main thing to journalists is, if you cover it, just make sure that you're specific. And make sure that you're covering things in a way that reflects how it went down, not just like what the police said went down or whatever, or even what the organizers said down. Like, be there so you can see what goes down and then report it.
There's a lot of questions about kind of the possibility and potential impact of a general strike in the U.S. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, organized labor has been shrunk and has been damaged by recent administrations and all that. Yet there's still a force, and we saw the arrest of the union leader in L.A. What's your sense of that as a possible action in the near future?
Yeah. Um, it's very useful for movements to be able to develop the capacity for mass economic non-cooperation, like a general strike. It is something that does not happen quickly, and it is costly. And so there are sort of two things to think about. One is being able to credibly do it, and the other is actually the hardship that comes with it that needs to be prepared for. So on the credibly doing it side, um, it's pretty dangerous to call for such a thing and try to organize it and then for that to fail. Because that signals weakness, fragmentation, factionalism, and all the things that a movement doesn't want to convey in the short term. The other thing about it is that a movement will be most powerful at the point where it can call for a general strike, do a general strike, and stop a general strike. stopping and the ability to stop it is as important as the ability to start it.
Yeah.
Because if it just looks like anything the government does, the movement's going to respond in like an adversarial way, and there's no way out, why would the government ever do it, try to work with that? Or why were people in the pillars of support try to work with that? If you can credibly turn it on and off, then it shows that you have real power. The American labor movement right now is not really a movement. It's a it's a bunch of unions that have a very wide range of adherence to or opposition to the Trump agenda. I'd say it's quite fragmented among itself. Within unions, there's a lot of fragmentation. And that's deliberate. There have been efforts to gut unions over the last 50 years. And that's true here. It's true in many places in the world. And it's been deeply damaging to the so-called labor movement. And so while organized labor really has to be on side for a general strike, if it ever came to that in this country, so would not organized labor, which is to say, the many workers in this country who are not in unions, but who would need to be organized and prepared for such a thing. The last thing I'll say is about the hardships. Unions are dangerous, or not unions. Strikes are dangerous. And they can result in lost jobs. They can result in people going hungry and their kids going hungry. There are lots of things that need to be thought about and prepared for if such a thing was to occur. And so, like I said, the instinct to build capacity toward it, I think, is an appropriate instinct. But to not rush into it and to sort of think through the strategy of it and when and why it would be needed, I think is important.
Mike Filson's asking a question, an important one. If anti-MAGA protests grow in effectiveness and begin to threaten the viability of Trump's regime, to what extent should the protest movement be concerned with organized violence from far-right militias, or I suppose we could say from government actors as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a real concern. And so actually, I'm going to drop in the chat this guide. Let's see, I think it's called the Hope Guide that a few of my colleagues, had put together a year ago or so, which is called the Hope Guide, and it's about making political violence backfire. And it's particularly meant for community responses to that kind of scenario, where you've got
Thank
sort
you.
of paramilitaries, militias, et cetera. And so I just think it's like the best resource out there for, again, taking an episode of escalated repression or violence against peaceful protesters and responding to it in a way that actually helps the movement. And there are ways to do it.
Thank you. Um, Force Multiplier has been amplifying. We're primarily a fundraising organization. We've been amplifying different kinds of protest and other activities. And the most recent one that we've done is for the 1 Million Rising organizing campaign. And
Yeah.
I wonder if you could say a word about that, and we'll drop a link in chat for people to register to participate in it.
Yeah. So the No Kings kind of crew put on the first mass non-cooperation training that they wanted to organize of three last week. And as far as anyone knows, it's probably the largest ever mass nonviolence training that's ever taken place, which is really quite something. I mean, by the time I registered for it, there were like 150,000 people or something who'd registered before me. So that's incredible. You can watch it even if you couldn't be there. And I kind of recommend you do watch it because even if the content is something you've already heard before or something, just to sort of be part of that, I think is special. It's one of those like historical things that takes place, and there are going to be two others coming up that are sort of follow-ons from that first hour-long training. And I think uh, for those of us who have been thinking about like this kind of moment that we're in now for a few years, one of the most important things that I think many of us agreed would be needed is some kind of mass training and mass popular education. Because what an autocrat really wants is for people to come on side or go away. And um, and they want them to go away because they want them to be afraid and disempowered and demobilized and hopeless. And the antidote to that is helping people understand that they have agency, that nothing is permanent, that what they do matters, that yes, it's not risk-free, but but we have a historic opportunity to help, and this generation to renew the promise of what the United States could someday be, and to help build that. And there's a really technical term in sociology that Doug McAdam wrote about, like when people become activated and begin to take action on nonviolent resistance or social movement, protest, or other things. And he calls it cognitive liberation. And cognitive liberation is when people begin to understand that the situation they face is intolerable, that they can and must do something about it, and that now that they know this, they can't unknow it. And so, like, that's hope and agency and empowerment. And these trainings that are happening help people get there, right? When they are feeling hopeless and like unmoored in society. And so we really are going to have to do things together. And a great first step is getting involved in some of the online training and content that's now coming out and available. Because, as I said, the more we can cohere and people are starting to speak a common language about what's needed and a shared analysis and a theory of change, the more effective it'll be down the line.
Erica, just want to turn to you for any closing thoughts that you might have for people on this call and how we individually and collectively can be effective members of this resistance movement and have the most impact in the coming months.
Yeah, thank you so much. I would just say find the people who are organizing where you are. Maybe some of you are the people who are organizing where you are, but get together with other people and think about affinity groups and like community support and the things that are needed right where you are. And I would say, there's everybody has their own spheres of influence. Everybody has their networks, their personal networks, their professional networks, their family networks. And I think that the more people can actually have courageous conversations, engage in some, persuasive work and experiment with that, and really like like fully fully engage, fully participate with their communities, the more likely we are not just to get through this moment, but also to live in a country afterward that we want to live in, right? So, I think that we have a lot of rebuilding to do, both in our sort of democratic institutions and norms, but also in the social fabric of our communities. And that social fabric and reweaving it together is what's going to allow us to build the irresistible future that folks are hoping to live. So it is about the right to protest, and it is also about just living one's life in the way that one, that one can live it, to bring a spirit of civic responsibility into people's lives, and that's attractive. And I just hope you're doing it tonight. You're literally doing it tonight, and I hope you keep doing it.
Thank you so much. I'm just really grateful to you for being here tonight and for all the work that you're doing. And we will put it to use. We will put it to use. So a couple phrases that are sticking with me from your remarks are cognitive liberation and these courageous conversations. So thank you very much, Erica. Thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you for your support. I hope you'll join us at one of our upcoming events, which are listed on our website. So thanks again to everybody and have a good night.